And we are joined now by Jessica Preheim, Vice President of Strategic Planning and Public Affairs at Houston Coalition for the Homeless. Jessica, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. The work that you guys have done and the outcomes that you've had, it's been really remarkable. Houston's the fourth largest city in the United States, and since your organization has been spearheading this, I think since 2011, 2012, you've decreased homelessness in Houston by over 60%. That is incredible. Really, I guess I want to start with, how did you do it?
Yeah, absolutely. It has been a journey. I will say we didn't start here. This is in 2011, we had one of the worst numbers of homelessness in the United States. We had the sixth largest, in fact, close to, at any point in time, over 9,000 individuals were experiencing homelessness. And at the same time, we were giving back money. So, we were really at a critical point. And with that, HUD declared us a priority city that for a lot of people sounds like something really good, but it's actually something really bad that says you have to get it together. We also had a very, very strong mayor in East Parker at the time who said, we are going to come together and think differently. So in 2011, I know we were kind of ahead of some cities. We really came together and said, we are going to have one strategy. We have a lot of really amazing service providers. We have a lot of really amazing funders, and we're all doing really amazing things on our own. And it is not getting us where we need to be. So, we intentionally kind of came together and we said, we had a community charrette. We said, out of this, we are going to identify what our problems are. We're going to be honest about it. And we are going to commit to really having a coordinated path forward. And so, that was really the kind of impetus to get us, moving in the right direction. It's a process that never ends. So to this day, that coordination and that embedded funding is a part of what we do.
And basically, what your guys' group said, you did this radical thing where you said the solution for homelessness is giving people homes and not making it a condition about getting clean before you're helped, which a lot of religious programs do or addiction programs do, making it contingent upon your drug use. That was not what your organization focused on. How much of that was a conscious choice on your end?
Absolutely, 100%. Housing is the end to homelessness, and I think there is a misconception about housing first. It is not housing only. Housing first is absolutely not housing only. I kind of like to say, we all have our own demons. We all have our own things that we battle on a daily basis, myself included. And I have the luxury to do it behind a closed door. I have the luxury to, have a space to process. And so, we really said, we are going to house our most vulnerable folks. We're going to house our folks that are circling, in and out of hospitals, who are going in and out of justice system because they're, on the streets. We're going to put them in their housing. We're going to give them housing. We are going to have tenant protections for that person. They're going to have a lease in their own name. And then we as a homeless response system are going to be responsible for continually being there to offer support services. And that was a shift. It was a shift from going to earning housing to have housing and making it the homeless, response system's responsibility to support you to maintain that housing. And the results were, they were instant. People stay housed with that philosophy, and they get markedly more stable. And that's really what we're aiming for.
It's a major source of stability that then you can work on treating other problems, of course. But once you take the homeless part away, I mean, it makes those mountains so much easier to climb. And I was reading the New York Times write-up about your organization as well, and just the people, when homeless people are out of sight, out of mind to them, don't necessarily realize, like, a $10 Planet Fitness membership is necessary for people to be able to shower or charge their phone. People sleeping in cars in different public spaces. Like, just because you're choosing not to think about homeless people doesn't mean that their needs and aren't need being sought to be met in other areas where it could have just been solved by if they had a shower in their home. There you go, right? And then these other issues that people perceive that they would largely go away, and then you could deal with, say, if there are addiction or health issues. Um, uh, is that, in your experience, accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, imagine trying to get a job when it requires you to have clean clothes and, like you said, a shower. Where are you going to do that? If you're trying to, you need an ID and you don't have anywhere for them to, the automotive, the state to mail it to you. What are you going to do? Having that place is just the fundamental part of all of our lives. That home base and stability just goes from there. We see our folks stay housed and they earn income, and they asking people to solve all their problems while living on the streets isn't feasible in 99% of the time. It is that roof is something that you just cannot take for granted.
40% of people who are homeless nationally have a job too. So it's about that added stress of, one, it's just a massive indictment on our systems, but it's also about the stress of maintaining that. And that, I should say, that differs from the chronically homeless, which is a different category, which I'm wondering if you could parse out the differences between being homeless or being classified as being homeless versus being, say, chronically so, and how your organization responds to those different categories.
Yeah, I always like to say, by the time you're homeless, every other system has failed you. One system or another has failed you. If it's child welfare, if it's education, whatever it is, you've been failed by all those safety nets. There's individuals who have fallen into homelessness. Number one cause of homelessness is loss of income. And, those folks, we don't have a one size fits all approach to homelessness here. We really think through, what are the intervention types that are going to get people out of homelessness as quickly as possible with the lightest touch possible. So people who are falling into homelessness, they might just need a few months rent, and then they are able to pay the rent for ongoing themselves, and we will never see them. They'll never experience the homelessness again. There are some individuals who've been homeless for a really long time. Those are the individuals who often have a disability. They often have other barriers. They may have no credit. They may have a criminal background just as a result of being homeless. And so those are individuals that we consider to be, chronically homeless. And we really here as a homeless response system know that we want to be there to provide that permanent solution. So we have partnerships with, we kind of call it the three-legged stool. You have your safe place to live, you have some subsidy to pay and help supplement some of your rent, and you have the case management supports to make sure that you're able to maintain your housing. And so that's really, we target that heavier intervention to individuals who have that long-term homeless. And we do use, we have a standardized assessment of who gets that resource. It's not agency A can kind of cherry pick and say, hey, Bob's in front of me, I'm housing Bob right now. We really say, guess what? The next person on the wait list based on their vulnerability is Fred. And so you're gonna house Fred today, and we are going to continue to work with Bob and make sure that he has the resources he needs as well. So it's kind of it's a mental shift to think about how you prioritize people into housing, and really trying to remove that philosophy of having to earn it. And just everyone deserves housing.
And I think this is not me, but I'm curious how you respond to somebody who says, well, what about shelters? People already have shelters and they can go there if they need. How is what you set up in terms of dignified housing different than that of going to a shelter?
Yeah, we have shelters here. Most of our shelters are privately funded. We made the decision to invest in the permanent solution. A shelter is not a permanent solution to homelessness. It's a really expensive intervention that is needed. It is a crisis, it is a necessity that our community needs, but it's not ending anyone's homelessness. Someone will go into a shelter and they still need the what's next. And we invested in the what's next from day one. It's less money, it serves more people, and it actually gets people to the resolution they need. So we really haven't. I think we were faced with this when COVID hit. A lot of other communities really kind of thought they invested in, motels, hotels, non-congregate shelter. We for a moment had this moment of pause where we thought, should we go that route, or should we take these resources and get people where they need to go long term? And we for a second kind of paused and said, no, we're going to invest in the permanent solution. We are going to invest in a lease in someone's name. If it's the deposit and 6 months rent, a year rent, that's what we're going, that's going to end their homelessness, not putting someone into a non-congregate shelter.
And I mean, you say the deposit there, right? Like, look at how big that gulf is in between, say, if somebody just lost their job and they're paycheck to paycheck, and they have to go through their savings in order to make up some or to make payments, etc. And they don't have the money for a deposit. I mean, these rental markets are so crazy right now that no problem for an upper middle class person to give a full month's rent as a deposit for an apartment, and go through a credit check and wait for, I don't know, 7 days for an approval for an apartment. But for somebody who may have fallen into a circumstance where it's precarious, that is a way too big of a fault line for so many people in this country, and particularly in a big city like Houston, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us are living, one paycheck away from a disaster. And when that one paycheck happens, homelessness is often a result. And, one thing that we really tried to be is intentional with our services. We tried to rethink how can we stretch every dollar as much as possible, which I think makes Houston really unique. In that we all figure out our niche. So we have a landlord engagement team. They go out and they recruit. We know that it's hard to find quality, affordable housing units across this nation, and it's getting harder. So we have teams that really have those conversations with property owners that say, hey, guess what? I have someone who has pretty bad credit or no credit. They might have a criminal background. If we can pay you, an incentive fee, will you just waive all that? And a lot of the properties say yes. And, we become the case manager for the landlord. And in turn, they say, we're going to house your client. So a lot of the homeless response system's responsibility in Houston is also to kind of be that conductor behind the scenes. We're air traffic control. We figure out what the barriers are. We try to act always on behalf of our clients, and to really figure out how we get all of our partners' needs met, which includes our property owners, and to pay those things.
So I guess I'm curious a bit about what things were like before your organization made such a big dent, because I know that Houston had a lottery system that was basically window dressing to help homelessness. Can you talk a bit about the era before your organization's work began, and how difficult it was for really anybody who was homeless to get approved through the system?
Yeah, it was often your ability to get housed was the door that you walked through. So if I walked into an organization and the first person I met with had been working with homelessness for 30 years and they knew everyone in this city, they were probably going to get me housed. But if I walked into the office next door and met with someone who just got their social work degree and is 22 and right out of college and doesn't have those connections, I'm probably going to remain homeless. We, even in the beginning of this, met and mapped out all the different steps that it took to get someone housed. We started with veterans. We mapped it out. There were 76 individual steps that we made someone go through to get housed. And this is for, veterans who had access and qualified for rental assistance and case management services. And so we really, had to step back and be like, is that efficient for any person, any human? Is that efficient for organizations? organizations, and why are we doing it? That really just having those conversations, but all the barriers that we self-imposed, really was able to kind of open up the door to these larger collaborations. It's rare. I don't think I've ever met anyone who says that they don't want to end homelessness. We don't always speak the same language. And I think that cuts across all party lines. Like we sometimes use the wrong words to describe what we want, but we all want the same thing, and we have to open up that dialogue to be able to make progress, and that's what we've really tried to do here.
But do real estate developers really want the same thing? Like, what has been your experience in Houston? Because I'd imagine that's a pretty powerful lobby that does not want to deal with any of this.
It's getting harder for us. I think it's getting harder everywhere. But property owners care about their bottom line, and if you as a system can say, "Hey, guess what? I'm going to be paying your rent." I am going to be paying your deposit, and you're going to actually have a guarantee that there's going to be someone here to support your client should they have issues. Because sometimes we don't have the best units. Sometimes it's a C class unit versus an A or B. It might not be the $3,000 a month condo, and they have natural turnover. So part of us, we really do play to the bottom line of properties. So they might not say, and I want to end homelessness, but they might also say, hey, I really need to make sure that I am making a profit on this property. And so we really kind of approach every one of our partner of understanding and asking the questions of what matters to you, and how are we actually saying the same thing? Because most of the time we are.
Lastly, I guess, I'm struck by your approach in contrast to, say, cops breaking up encampments and just, can't be here, go somewhere else. We don't really care where you go, but it all being about the city aesthetic and not wanting to necessarily deal with the problem. When you see some of these images around the country, what's really your response to that? Because it seems like it seems frankly like your work should be duplicated throughout the country, and in some of these instances it's maddening.
It is. Here we've really taken the approach that our police partners are our partners, but we want to be intentional. There is moving an encampment and dispersing people doesn't end their homelessness. We take the exact same approach. We really are intentional to be like, hey, there's an encampment over here of 30 people. We don't go in on day one and say, hey, tomorrow this is going to be moved. We do have a very intentional encampment response. We do address encampments, but what we do is kind of say holistically, these are people here. We go in, we get the name of everyone who's there. We know, if they have untreated health conditions. We know if they have an ID. We know what their criminal, backgrounds could be, or some of their barriers, or if they have income. And we spend a lot of time leading up to an encampment closure just to say, I'm going to get to know you. We're going to have a by name list. I'm going to continue to let you know, hey, in 2 weeks or in a month, this encampment is going to be closed, and we have a housing option for you. We do not close an encampment unless we have a housing option to offer someone. Otherwise, it just moves the problem all around the city. It doesn't actually address homelessness. That has been one of our biggest tools is if we close an encampment, we are here to offer you a housing option, and people say yes. That's another, I think, misconception, is that people will say no. We've on our encampments, we've been able to close 57 encampments since COVID hit. So that's a lot. And 90% were housed. Some people self-resolved, and sometimes that's a conversation of, hey, we're here every day. We're going to help you reconnect with mom and you can go back. So they were no longer homeless. So we just embed housing as the solution to homelessness in everything we do. And that it just takes a lot of conversation. And it takes making people who you think aren't your partners.
So how can people help? Houston Coalition for the Homeless, what can our viewers do, say, if they want to help your organization, but also to get involved in their communities to take some of these practices?
I think it's really, helping and encouraging a system approach. I think it's supporting and advocating for kind of a single coordinator of a homeless response system. I don't, countries don't usually function well if they had 6 presidents, but you sometimes need, one person who can really be, or one organization that can be really trying to, coordinate. So I think it's figuring out who the lead agency is. I think it's supporting. I also think about not necessarily saying, hey, everything we're going to give is goods, but sometimes it's expertise of the community. Like, do you have expertise in building affordable housing? Do you have expertise in employment? Thinking a little differently as a community about what giving looks like is really important. I think if I'm really good at grant writing and I can go to a small nonprofit and say, hey, like, let's figure out how we can strengthen your abilities. I think those things are really, really powerful. Like people's, collective impact. And, at the lead agency, we're always here to help people navigate giving. But I think it's also encouraging elected officials to mandate partnerships. Like, don't make it an option, because sometimes options people say no. Like, say, like, hey, make these people talk, make these people collaborate, and support that when it happens.
Well, can't thank you enough for your time today, and it was really awesome to hear more about your work. Jessica Preheim, VP of Strategic Planning and Public Affairs at Houston Coalition for the Homeless. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.